After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
All right, folks. Welcome back to Greenhouse Gaslighting, episode 110. It's great to be here. It is a very low effort freestyle episode today. It's me and Sky in the studio today.
What's up?
I just figured, after 5 straight elections episodes, it's about time we kind of delve into some of the old stuff that I feel like...
What? There's an election this year?
Oh, God.
Oh my God, I didn't know. It's not like every part of my life hasn't been taken over by it. And I'm telling you, this cycle has been endless. So thank God it's almost over.
I mean, it's... The thing that, I liked to talk about on the show, and it's not like we haven't been talking about it. I just think that, doing it through the lens of the election sometimes can, obscure this, and also because of just, I mean, I'll be frank, this has just been a bad year for everybody, frankly speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's been rough to put content out, and I think, at some level, I think it's good that we're not feeding the content machine as much. But I think one thing that I liked doing for the show, and I think something I'm hoping we can maybe get back into after the election ends, and probably because it'll be needed, is countering, hegemonic ideology, examining the effect it has on people. And that's going to be a recurring theme in today's discussion. Because I think after you'd gotten into this, we were like, okay, we need to really unload on this on the podcast at some point. Finally got a chance to get you in the studio, and I think it's about... I mean, if you haven't been able to tell by the title, we're just going to be doing a deep dive on Isabel Wilkerson's recent book that's been making way too many waves, and I think both of us can agree that it's a very problematic read, but from the liberal perspective, on race and caste. So I've already blathered in my introduction. Is there anything you want to introduce before we just get into it?
Yeah, so for work, we had a retreat that there was a portion that we were going to be discussing, actually the film associated with this book, which I swear to God, I can go on and on about this stuff, and we really have. But
oh, we will. I'll structure the discussion. Yeah. Don't worry.
We will, and you and I individually have, but we had to watch the movie, and that was my first understanding of this concept, was through the movie, not through the book. So the movie is kind of it's a portrayal of Isabel Wilkerson before she writes the book and her process of writing the book, because she goes through first being a caretaker for her aging mother, and then her husband dying, and then her mother dying, while all of this is during the peak of the Black Lives Matters movement. And it is really interesting.
So 2015, 2016-ish is the period of the film?
Yeah. Well, actually, no. It's because a part of it starts with Trayvon Martin. And also the movie goes throughout time. So it starts at Trayvon Martin and Isabel Wilkerson like living through that as a journalist and being told that she should write about that because of her experience of journalism. But it also goes through her life, and it goes also back in time with these narratives of other people. So it truly, like, I can't even say what the time period it is because it is a throughout history time period. But her, like, let's say 2009 to probably 2019,
Okay.
that is the timeline of her life that we see, and a little bit of her life before then, like before she was meeting her husband, who is a white man, um before her mother's descent, and after, and the death of her another one of her family members who were very close to her. So it's crazy that this whole thing isn't about grief, because she is going through so much grief throughout the story, and the movie especially, it's really showing it, because the book is really about her theory, and then the movie is about her writing the book, where you would think that the movie is a reenactment of the book. It is not, which is really confusing.
I think that's been like, because here's the thing: you've directly engaged Wilkerson's work at this point. I've only done the cringe leftist thing of like reading about something through someone else and then like coming to opinions about it. But that seems to be a general recurring trend in criticisms of her work. And I kind of read some samples of her journalistic work from like the 90s, and I think the hype, well, let me rephrase that. I think like Wilkerson's approach to journalism, as well as how she likes to present stories to her audience, is in these kind of like wide spanning narratives interspersed with like anecdotal reporting and retellings of past events. And I think in her earlier journalistic career, she's touching up on themes of crime, moral panic, and um particularly like urban decay, right? So I think you characterize her work as like poverty porn to some extent.
Yes.
Okay.
And I will say, like, uh, one of one of the reasons why Wilkerson is this kind of authority on these groups, like her book before this is about the Great Migration and it follows multiple families.
The Warmth of Other
But
Suns, that book, yeah, yeah.
yes, but she is actually the first African American woman to receive a Pulitzer Prize in journalism,
Mm-hmm.
and she received that from um, a article she did about the Midwestern floods, and this little black boy who was 10 years old, and he was in charge of taking care of him and his four siblings because his mother was in school trying to better their life, and his father was out of the picture. But like, you know how I just said that and you have empathy for them and you like hear that and you're like, oh wow. But in her book, or in her article, she made sure to say, and this was what, 90s, so apart from the course, but it's like, what, the welfare stricken mother and poverty and the drug riddled father who was never in their lives. And it's like, I guess you could have. Those are adjectives that you definitely could use for like people who are suffering tragedies. But like, it's not necessary. But that is the type of story that won her the first Pulitzer Prize in journalism that any African American woman has ever received.
And do you think that plays into like, because again, like the term poverty porn itself is kind of like graphic in a way, but it kind of speaks to this like gratification for the consumer or the viewer, right? In the same way that something like, I don't know, Precious, um,
Mm-hmm.
gratifying to certain viewers, or how like, I don't know, more macabre subjects like true crime fulfill like a similar niche for their audiences of like
Mm-hmm.
something visceral and like gritty and unnerving that's also very entertaining and dramatic to consume.
I mean, the thing with true crime, and I will say as a true crime consumer, is that there is this overarching feeling like the reason why we listen to it is yes, it's entertaining and all this other stuff. But if you know about it, there's this like type of anxiety. You are less likely to go through whatever these true crime situations are because you know about it and you know how to protect yourself. Hypothetically, that is like one of the reasons why people also like consume true crime.
But
But when it
that
comes to like Wilkerson and being this um like middle, I would say upper middle class family, her dad was a Tuskegee Airman. That is something in the book and the movie and on the Wikipedia page for the book and the movie, you will know her father was a Tuskegee Airman. Now, I will say that is the only mention of her father in all of this stuff. But then you look into her father, and her father was a DJ, he was an engineer, and he also didn't die until 2023. So why isn't he a part of any of this discussion? I don't know, but he's a Tuskegee Airman. Um, but she is coming from a very privileged background to be doing this journalism. And she also worked for the New York Times, like their Chicago bureau. Very privileged job to have. She went to Howard University. Very privileged to be able to afford to go to a HBCU. Um, Especially because she was born in DC, but they moved because of the Great Migration. She really doesn't talk about where, but she wasn't. It wasn't like Howard was one of the biggest options because of its locality. It was because it is a prestigious HBCU, and that's where a lot of middle class Black people go because they can afford it and like that prestige,
Yeah, and I
like
think
our
that
presidential candidate.
so again, I mean, it's good that you bring up like these class dynamics, right? Because like I think that is something that Wilkerson either unintentionally or very intentionally is trying to obscure in her writing and work. Another thing that I wanted to bring up as well in the reporting I've sampled, as well as her perspective presented in The Warmth of Other Suns and on Origins of Our Discontents, um, it is again on if it's a greenhouse gaslighting joint, we got to talk about American civil religion, we got to talk about hegemonic ideology, we got to talk about the effect of ideology on perspective and worldview and criticism, blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
And I think like you especially stressed on this when we were talking about your reactions to the book when you first read it, and I think this is just something that comes up in Wilkerson's reporting as well, and I think this is another reason, because I think the thing that I find particularly worrisome about the popularity of Origins and the popularity of Wilkerson's work to some extent, right, is that she's kind of an easy consumable icon for the Daily Show crowd, the Colbert Report crowd, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the old, again, I feel like this is offensive to say to some extent because I don't want to present this idea that Black authors or Black scholarship is illegitimate. I don't believe that in any way. However, the term I said this with you was like the Oprah book clubification of political and social history, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of very convenient packaging and presentation of these inflection points or these theories about American society that are intended for the consumption of a particular demographic, of a particular political constituency, um, but aren't particularly elucidating or like instructive or informative or educational. And when it comes to, on the, the warmth of other suns, that one has been lauded as like, very well researched. It's encouraged further academic study and exploration into the Great Migration, which I think is a good thing, right? I think that is a
Mm-hmm.
critical period to understand, and especially like after reading Bottom Up, which was the book about the Ford Foundation and racial liberalism, right? Like no one really understands, right, how like the Great Migration itself is this defining moment for like the development of the American economy and stuff like that. People don't really examine it in that context when they should. Um, at the same time, however, like criticisms of the book that I keep seeing are these like hasty, disconnected, and confusing narratives. This weird interjection of fiction and storytelling amid like historical recounts and like nonfiction writing. And I think it kind of the thing I wanted to say about her 1994 report, which I think was about like increasing rates of youthful crime. I really did appreciate that in the report, like Wilkerson takes great pains to stress that like race is not a statistical, reality or a accepted explanation. Like it is not an acceptable explanation for the cause of this crime because it's happening across racial demographics, which I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that she did that. What I found confusing was like, and I guess it's like the Reader's Digest style or like just, these magazine style pieces of like an extensively written researched piece that spans a couple pages for like the reader's um I would say the reader's reading pleasure, right? But it's a longer piece. It's intended to be a bigger feature piece in that style of reporting, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was again just interlaced with like stats, interviews, anecdotes, and a lot of reporting is like that. But Wilkerson's particular style gets confusing because like she'll extrapolate that same style into books, and I kind of see that play
Mm-hmm.
into the Ava DuVernay film where it's like it gets confused and um I'm not going to say circular. I'm just going to say like it's kind of like drawing connections um tangentially when there's better ways to do it. And even if you
Yes.
want to talk about your anecdotal experiences, like I'm a-okay with people doing that. I'm a-okay with that. But what especially like seeing Wilkerson's book get like just these like these massive endorsements and these like this like fawning treatment from like Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and stuff like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
very confusing to me because it's like on closer inspection, as you and me have done. And bear in mind, I just want people to know, like, we are not the smartest people in the podcasting sphere at all. I'm an armchair intellectual at best, and even then, like my reading is very surface level. it's mostly vibes based, but on inspection of Wilkerson's theories and presentation of caste as a unifying explanation for racial discrimination and dysfunction in the United States, it just doesn't hold up. Even by its own standards, it doesn't hold up. And I don't know why. Well, we can guess why, but it's it's worrying that like people are consuming this as if the case has been cracked when like it is a willful obfuscation, to me at least.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing with like after watching the movie and then like I watched the movie, I was like, okay. And then I was like, okay, I have so much to say, but let me read the book. So I got on Libby. This is not an ad, but Libby is great. Um, but I got on Libby and I requested the book and I was waiting for it. And I was like, I probably actually won't even listen to that book, but I kept stewing in it. Like I kept getting mad because I'm like, I feel like I'm missing something. So I have to read the book to get whatever I'm missing. And then I did, and I still feel that way. And
And then I think,
actually, I
okay,
feel that way, and I'm even more mad because I'm like, girl, I listened to this book for how long? And you didn't really say anything more than you said in the first few pages.
yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like Wilkerson's kind of continually winking at the reader, like you're gonna find out. I'm about to drop some real shit, and then like it never goes anywhere. But more than that, it's like, especially like someone with your educational background, right? Like you have examined things like intersectionality, you have examined things like critical race theory, you have
Mm-hmm.
observed some of the sociological stuff. And I think the biggest thing when you were presenting this to me, right? Like, bear in mind, this is something that me and Sky have just been like, it's been just a continued, like, um, I wouldn't say debate. It's more of just like a continued commiseration we have about this book and like the
It's a
ideology.
joke. Like it, like it just be like, well, just like, oh yeah, look at that person experience racism. I mean casteism because racism doesn't exist because that's literally what she says. Like
It's
I'm not
also
making that up.
it's also funny because us being like a black and Indian couple, right? Like that we can joke about that,
Right.
but it's a very unique joke that me and you get to enjoy. But at the same time, it's also just like uniquely frustrating to us who like have some theoretical understanding of some of this stuff as well as like the lived experience. Like we can kind of just flat out look at this book and be like, that's cap. Like this is none of this applies.
Mm-hmm.
But to like the, I mean, again, I don't want to bring the election into this, but it keeps coming up to the crowd that is like ready to go like all in on Kamala and has convinced themselves that they have the correct views on race and integration while also, moving to the right on immigration and foreign policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That contradiction they're never going to fucking square away. And I think that kind of like contradictory and frankly to me hypocritical type of thinking is going to lead to more people who like are going to say, hey, I read this, look at me, as well as people who genuinely think that casteism, as Wilkerson describes it, not as caste has been described by other historians, sociologists, thinkers, and societies in their interpretation of it, as an explanation for racial dysfunction and social disharmony in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the film is kind of a running mix of what is essentially Wilkerson's biography during this time. You also mentioned that there's like these interspersed scenes of like various historical events as well.
Yes. So some of the actual narratives that are in the stories they have a depiction of them in the movie, which you think that that's the whole movie, like that's what the movie would be, just all of these depictions.
So
But
out of
no,
nowhere, Ambedkar's there for no fucking reason. Ambedkar's there,
well,
and then they come
I
back.
mean, it makes sense because like Ava DuVernay is like she's a good director, but it's like
Mhm.
it's just it's like why is this the way you guys decided to make the movie? I just don't understand why it was this intertwine of her life beforehand and this movie as well. Actually, I do understand because it's focusing more on her as this black woman who is a journalist, who all of this other stuff, and not the words that she is actually saying. That should be the interesting thing. How many movies about books have the writer as the main subject? And I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that it's weird. And I'm also saying that it didn't fit this topic.
Just as a way to frame a film, it doesn't make sense. Just
It
like a
really doesn't. Also, like, I I girl, I do not need to know all of your fucking drama. Like, I should not know that your husband died and that your mama died and your favorite cousin died and you saw all of these people die in front of you and you obviously have daddy issues because your daddy isn't mentioned and he was alive during the whole time of this movie being created and like produced and all of it. So it's so because like if you were gonna give me an insight of who you are, the insight that the movie is giving me is not enough. And it is also, but like, if I'm gonna be honest, because I was looking not that long ago at her Instagram, um, and she's the thing that she does, and I want everyone to know that I'm not like this person who thinks that you need to have like a certain education to be an authority on things. I'm not saying that at all. But she has only, from what I can see, received a bachelor's degree in the 80s. But she is being used as this person who is supposed to be created the one of the best books about race and whatever the fuck, like whatever you want to say, but like she has taught at places, but she has not continued her formal education, which is not saying that you need to, but usually for a person in her situation, wouldn't you want to get the degrees, get the PhD, so you can be the aforementioned person to know this, like you 100% know this because of the theory that you have studied that goes back to the narrative that you have seen. No, like, and this is also me as I will say someone who has a creative writing background, needs to write more, understandably, and a semi social justice background with my higher ed degree. I I'm just like you. She made this book so she can go to conferences, and I'm
the
not
book selling
saying that to
circuit. Oh
be.
no.
I'm not trying to say this to be mean, but I'm looking at her Instagram, and that's all it is. It's just her signing books and going to these conferences where she talks and talks and talks, and it's just like even even if we're saying like You don't need to get extra education to be an expert in your field, whatever. Are you learning anything or are you just talking? Because that's what it's really looking like. It's really looking like your main thing is to sell books, to sell articles like journalists do. But, and then you spent your time on this project that you had all the time to do because you had the income to do so, first of all, to travel to India and talk to all these people, to travel to Germany and talk to all these people and whatever. But you're talking is not education, especially if you talk to people who tell you what you want to hear.
Another thing, just by the way, like I know that you definitely read the book, and like you kind of mentioned too that like Wilkerson doesn't really put her sources first, or like the kind of people. Like she just said, an Indian professor told me. I'm like, that could be anybody.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like if you're saying like you went to India to do research, like did you just go to New Delhi? You talked to a couple academics and then you went back, or like
I mean, that's honestly how the book kind of portrayed it, but like
okay,
I don't, or like not the book, the movie, um, when they were showing her and like her going to India and being so shocked because there wasn't any traffic lights, but the traffic kept moving and how that was a metaphor. And it's like, girl, things keep moving because they have to. Things were moving before the traffic light was invented by
so
black
I mean,
people.
so the movie just did like black journalist Eat Pray Love, which I'm
It
really
really was.
okay, okay.
It really was. And then like a little bit of that and then a little bit of her like those narratives of people that she's researched, which I will, oh my God, those narratives are so much more interesting in the book than they are depicted on screen, even though they are interesting on screen. Like
What were some of
I
the
would have
narratives?
so there's one narrative that is of um a man who was a he became a part of the Nazis, and he was also in love with a Jewish woman. And I think this he was like, early Nazism, like they're telling you, hey, everything's gonna be great if you join us. And he just did it because he was told. But when he fell in love with a Jewish woman and they started facing discrimination, he's like, no, this isn't right. Um, and they are basically like hunted down, and I think they are both put in concentration camps.
Okay.
Very sad story, very like deep. The American story is of these two groups of social scientists who one was a black couple. I will say that the couple like in real life and in the movie were lighter skinned black couple. And they were in Germany for research and they nearly just escaped being round up while some white savior was like, you need to leave. And I'm like, did that actually happen? Or did they just understood that shit was going crazy because they're black and in the 20th century? Like they've dealt with racism. But this couple goes on and is doing a long-term study with another white couple of basically racism in the South, where
Mhm.
they both are in the same community, but the black couples in the black community and the white couples in the white community, and they're like writing down all of these race relations and stuff. And they have to meet in secret and they have to be very quiet and all this other stuff. And then it also talks about, I can't remember his name, that was the man who was a Dalit who became a professor.
B.R.
Um,
Ambedkar, is that who they're talking
yes,
about?
yes,
Okay,
yes,
okay.
yes. And his story and how like the Dalits are seen as undesirables and all this other stuff. But like the thing is the movie is leaving out things that the book talked about. Like the book went into more of, especially for like the social scientists, the book talks about how they were there for years doing this like multi-year in-depth study, and they got beat out by some white people from like I think Yale and Harvard who came and did like a 1 year study, and their book became like the race social science book that everybody used. And when they came out with their long-term multi-year study where the black man was actually the head researcher, everyone basically called it stupid and discriminated upon them even more, because we already heard what the white man said. We don't need to hear what the person of color said. Let's say the nice thing. Um, and also like one of the narratives, the end narrative, because I know we were talking about how people were confused that the movie ended with like the ghost of Trayvon Martin coming back and giving her this idea of this book. But that's not what happened. Someone probably just saw like the end scene and they were very confused because of how crazy the book jumps or the movie jumps everywhere. And the
Also,
first scene is Trayvon Martin.
I'm just letting you know, by the way, like you are making sense as someone who's read the book. As someone who's thinking about the audience, this makes no sense.
Because the book
Because the book
and the movie
doesn't.
make no sense. Like I'm so telling you. But like the end of the movie talks about this story of this black kid who was a part of this little league team that won their championship, and he was the only black kid, and they went to the swimming pool after, and he wasn't allowed in the pool, and um, he was actually forced to sit outside the pool, and then once they finally allowed him in the pool, he was on a floaty, while the lifeguard moved him around the pool and he couldn't touch his skin to the water at all, while all of the adults and children just lurked at him from outside the pool because they couldn't be in the pool while he was in the pool. And that story is very sad. But you learn in the book that that is being taught. Well, you learn in the movie too, but like that story is not being told in the perspective of that child. It is being told in the perspective of one of the white children who saw that happen and was basically like, I am confused and I don't know what is happening, but I have to continue to just go with the status quo. And it's like, obviously, we don't even know if the little boy in that story is even alive to this day or to the time where she was doing this research. But like the account that we were watching, that she is having this look into this little black boy's eyes, is the account of a white person talking about them going, like, not them going through it, but like talking about it in their perspective. So you get like the like, oh, that sucks, but we're not getting the narrative of the little black boy or the man who was that little black boy talking about like, this hurt, this whatever. We're hearing this white person talk about it because the way she basically said that we are not, the racism that killed Trayvon Martin is not the racism of the past because the guy who killed Trayvon Martin was Latino. He
Which,
was white,
but it doesn't.
but like,
And that's what I'm saying is like, I'm just trying to think of the audience here, right? And like, even as you're explaining this, I'm like, I see why this book drove you insane. And like, honestly, like, I'm not saying this as a knock against you. I'm like, these anecdotes are so. It's not that they're not useful in some context. It's just they don't serve the cause of what Wilkerson claims to advance in her book, which is one, a unified theory of caste. Those anecdotes don't even serve to explain that. And I feel like
mm-hmm.
I did the audience a disservice by not explaining the core conceit of the book at the start. But I think you jumping into the case studies or anecdotes is probably better because it proves the disconnected style better, right?
I
So,
like it really. I'm so serious that if you are confused listening to this is a way better retelling than hers. And I think you should honestly please go read the book. Get it on Libby for free because maybe she don't need another book sale right now. But the liberals got her. Don't worry, she's making those book sales. But it is confusing because again, the thesis is that American racism, especially like black racism, because she really doesn't even talk that much about the natives. And I can go on another rant about that. But
or even like
American,
Hispanic racism or Asian American discrimination,
right,
none of that comes into play.
right,
Or even like
right,
white immigration waves, right? Like these are all
right.
different, disparate issues, but like it's a bizarre notion, and like I'm just trying to make sense of that, and like I I'm sorry if it felt like torture to get through that for both you and the audience, because it was. I'm not even
It
joking.
is. It really is. It's like I'm telling you, I don't
That was
think
the
that there
book.
was a
That literally
better
was the
way
book.
for us to explain what was happening in this than to just go out and just start word vomiting like she did in some sense about this. So yes, she is saying that America, it has race, but the problem isn't racism, it's casteism. And it is the same type of casteism that is happening and has happened in India for a fuck ton of long time, and the same casteism that happened in Nazi Germany in that short amount of time.
Which I still don't understand because one, like her reading of just I was just starting with the period of Nazi Germany is itself kind of surface level and shallow, even when talking about one of the greatest war crimes in history, right? And
Right. Like
I think you talked about a passage where it's like she talked about the Holocaust as if it was exclusively done to like German Jews, not counting Poland or any other territory, right? As
right. Like
as like political dissidents, resistance groups,
and
homosexuals, disabled people. Like there were a bunch of people who were targeted as well, right? And like
exactly. And
leftists,
like
let's talk about that, but like she doesn't get into
she
that.
she literally says like I think 6 million Jews and 5 million others. What 5 million others? You know how many different groups of people were in that others, and you just
Right.
skim over it like it's and like she talks about class in the book for literally one small paragraph. I am not even kidding. And she's like, and it was like just like, and that's why this is caste, not class. Huh. And then she continues on and never talks about class again in the entire book. And again with colorism, which is crazy for a dark-skinned black woman to like only mention also in the context of Indian like colorism and not in the context of colorism when it comes to black people in America.
And especially that's another thing I
or
wanted to
other
get into.
people of color in America as well.
I did want to comment on that too, because another thing we talked about a lot with this book is um Wilkerson almost by design excludes the use of the term caste in the histories of Latin America, and also doesn't bring up um how colorism and race and inheritance rights, property rights, and racism writ large applied in the French holdings in the Caribbean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is suspiciously absent, and I think like again,
You would think that none of those other places exist.
which again also just reads bizarre to me because those systems had, even if they weren't directly applied in the United States, at least in like the context of Louisiana, those applied. So then you have Creole people that you can talk about. So leaving that out of the equation is weird. Not talking about it in the Spanish concept, because again, like the Spanish word "casta" is where we get the word caste, right? Or is it Portuguese word? I can't remember. But like,
But they're the same thing.
but you get what I'm saying, right? Is that like
Mm-hmm.
that concept of that colonial depredation and enterprise like sets the foundation for this field of studies, and it's spuriously absent from what she claims is her unified theory. And then in addition to that, I don't think she talks about caste in again, there's so much vitriol I have for some of this work. I guess I want to take a break before we get into like caste in the Indian context, because that's its own digression. But I think a big thing that I think I might have touched on this earlier, but I want it to be said unequivocally before I lose this train of thought, right? Is that this keeps coming up in Wilkerson's work in both her journalism, and especially in this book, and the way she's talking about it in interviews now, right? Is that Wilkerson is an adherent to the idea of American exceptionalism. She is bought in to American civil religion. She sees Black people within the American project as American liberals tend to do, as Black liberals are wont to do, right? It makes sense. What I don't understand is how, one, this theory even supports this idea. It doesn't make sense. But that ideological buy-in she has to the American project fuels the descent into contradiction that this work entails. Because Wilkerson is like of the mind that racism is a blight on America's greatness type of thinking, right? Like that is her approach to, it is, she sees it as this regrettable mistake, error, or flaw of the American project, rather than a perennial and perpetual tool that has been part of the design of the United States from its inception. And
how do we have America without slavery? We don't.
Right. And the thing is like, you can still, I mean, I think it is safe to say, right? Like, I'm someone who no longer has a buy-in to the American, civil religion, or the American project. I wish I had faith in America, right? Because I kind of have met people like who like it comes from a sincere place. They do think things can be better. They do think people have like they're better angels and like think good things can happen. So I don't hold everyone in contempt if they feel like there's hope for this place. I'm sure that comes from a good place, but I find Wilkerson's invocation of it to be bad at worst and confused and disconcerting at best, And I think again, it's just like the concept of caste that Wilkerson is trying to apply doesn't hold up by its own standards, but also it's like you're trying to compress several bits of pop history and surface level understanding into this bite-sized thing for Americans to consume. So it's like focused on these ideas of caste as like strictly defined racial hierarchies, and she is concerned somewhat uniquely with this idea of like ritual purity as a formation of caste. And I think that it's a confused and like I would say like very surface level similarity that she's looking at between how lower caste people in India are treated by people of higher caste, where higher caste people will say, "Oh, you have polluted me, or you have dirtied this space by coming into it." In the same way that like Wilkerson will invoke some of these very um harrowing stories of American racism, of these ideas of like, black people even daring to breathe the same air as an affront to white people. And I think the thing that's way simpler to understand is like, how about we just call it discrimination and call it wrong both times?
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm a scholar who can make that claim, nor is it like my wheelhouse to make that claim, but at the same time, like, to me at least, it's about the morality and it's about like the deep structural flaw that presents in a society, right? That like it's bad no matter the form it takes. It shouldn't happen. You want people to be collaborative, you want people to be cooperative, you want people to get along. You want social tensions to be low. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just, again, it's a very surface level reading of how caste has played out on the Indian subcontinent and how the violence and vitriol of American racism have been experienced by Black Americans. And I think Wilkerson is making a very poor comparison, and it is a very disingenuous at worst comparison and a very confused comparison at best.
Yeah. It it's also like I was just skimming the Wikipedia again, and like the fact that we really haven't talked about the pillars of caste, because it really isn't important that she defines these pillars of caste. And other than the fact that she used this as an example of why um, America's class system and racism is the same as Nazi Germany and India's caste system, but she doesn't use those examples for every single one of those pillars. So I'm like, you would have probably got me a little bit more if you use this is how it is in America. This is how it was in Nazi Germany. This is how it is in India. Like that probably would have got me more, but you just doing the black example, the American example for sure, and then a little bit of maybe either or the caste system in India and Nazi Germany. Like it's giving, you're just filling the word count. And as someone
Not
who
beating
had
the journalism allegations.
as someone who had writing intensive types majors where I had to write a lot of things, I get it. But also the way she explains race, and like if the way that your race and caste connection when it comes to all of those different places can be summed up in a very small paragraph on Wikipedia, you did the wrong thing. Because it's just saying that she argues that the social constructs of race and caste are not synonyms, but that they, quote, can and do coexist in the same culture and so serve to reinforce each other. Race in the United States is a visible agent of unseen force of caste. Caste is the bones, race is the skin. What is the muscles then?
I mean that's what I'm saying, right? Is that like
We're just like a skin and bones. Like you're the way you're using this analogy does not fit the anatomy that you're trying. Like it does. then what's the muscles?
But
What's the veins?
more than that too, right? It's like it seems like obfuscation on obfuscation. It just seems like I mean, I don't want to call people snake oil salesmen, but I kind of am in this case, right? Where it's just like there is a branch of study called sociology that has already gone in deep on this. There's existing debates on how to define this stuff. There's a variety of scholars and a vast dearth of scholarship on this specific subject, right? Of like how race plays out in America, how oppression is affected. Like, all this stuff has been like documented. So I don't get like why. Well, we've already gotten into it. It's to sell books. It's to sell products to a certain consumer base. Here we are again. Greenhouse gaslighting has nothing new to say once again. No, but I mean, but we keep saying it because it keeps keeps ending up to be true. But at the same time, like, it doesn't hold up by its own standards. It doesn't make sense. Like Wilkerson is trying to say that you can apply a caste system universally across the world, and it especially applies to the United States. However, intentionally leaves out how caste was applied in like Spanish colonial society, which was an this kind of like intersectional oppression of race and class in their society, right? And I think like the bottom line, and I think this is the real problem, is that Wilkerson's theory provides meaningful cover for liberals who want to continue to obscure the relationships between classes. It exists to intentionally obfuscate class consciousness, to intentionally obfuscate the dynamics by which race and class intersect in the United States. And it's especially telling to me that her position, as you've described adequately, right? Like an upper middle class black academic, well, not even academic, as like as a high level journalist, like, so as a high level professional, it serves very useful cover, to obfuscate their class position. I don't know if Wilkerson will ever come out and say that's what they're trying to do. I don't even know, because I cannot say definitively that Wilkerson knows what she's doing. I genuinely cannot say that. I don't know that for sure. What I'm comfortable saying, though, is like Wilkerson's reading of how caste operates in India is entirely surface level. Her invocation of B.R. Ambedkar is for brownie points. It's not even a very deep reading of his own work. It's not... And I mean, to top it off, it's like Wilkerson doesn't even talk about how caste plays out in Indian politics, in Indian society, or the historical, usage of it. So I just wanted to ask real quick, like, so Wilkerson proposes this idea of like the pillars of caste. Do you want to get into them, or is it just sufficient to say that like they don't even hold up by their own standards?
I mean, okay, let's do a quick. So
it's like the pillars of hip hop. It's like the pillars of Islam. Got it.
It's like 8 pillars of class. So divine will, the belief that social stratification is beyond human control, hereditability, the belief that social status is acquired by birth and is immune. It's like okay, like this is what you spend all this time figuring out, but then you only also put like so kind of to backtrack, like, so we're just gonna not talk about Europe. We're not gonna talk about like what the UK with their what you call caste system
we're not going to
instead of
talk about how the
racism.
California. I think another thing that I think is just I really Kristen's. I don't think she's even weighed in on like the fact that was it Gavin Newsom or there was something about like a bill to end caste discrimination in the state of California, and it didn't pass, right? And there was like a lot of like pressure on Newsom to repeal it by upper caste Indians from the area, I'm guessing, right? I can't say I've studied that particular story in detail. I just know for a fact Wilkerson didn't talk about it, and I think that's like the
Yeah.
kind of thing you'd think that someone who did all this scholarship on this subject would want to weigh in on, but what are you gonna do?
And then like also, she says aloud that it's not like the North wasn't racist, but then use only examples of like Jim Crow South. Like what?
Which
You're
again,
not even
another
using all of America. You're not using like what happened in the West. You're not using what happened you're not using any of this shit. You're not even using like anecdotes from your Great Migration fucking shit. You're just talking. And then it's literally it's like talking to a ninth grader. And you're like, but you don't know. And how am I supposed to tell you? Because can I, and will I be the person who wrecks your whole life by telling you everything that you believe in and everything that you know to be true is a lie?
Okay, so I wanted to weigh in on this for a minute, which is like the origins of caste in the Indian context. And I want to just weigh into that, like, despite being of the diaspora, I'm very poorly read. I could stand to do a lot better, and a lot of the reading I've done on this subject is surface level. What should be said about what I'm going to say is that why is my surface level reading poking holes in this well researched and well advertised book, right? That's I would ask the reader. But to cap this off, I just wanted to say that like the effect of caste in in the cultural memory of India, and especially like how history itself plays out in people's lives. We live in this amnesiac condition. Things may have happened in our lifetimes that we don't even understand affect us in very bizarre and ideologizing ways, if that's a word, right? And people take stock of the impact that their ideology what their ideology does to their thinking, what it does to their worldview. And moreover, they don't understand that even if they claim not to have one, they buy into something that has already been manufactured. And they buy into it without understanding it. So understanding what your worldview is and then understanding why you think about that is just something that every human being kind of has to do as part of their, the life of the mind, as it were, right? It's just a part of the human experience to really understand what you think and why you think it. But I say that because you wouldn't see this on your side of Twitter, I've seen this through various other things that like come into like the limited online experience I have. There was this one Indian lady on Twitter who like just started a feud for no reason, basically, where like she does this ugly ass triceps flex and then says like hashtag Brahmin jeans, and then proceeds to like do like right-wing Hindu shit and like keeps getting owned. Like it's just like the way like these right-wing figures in America will like continue to make asses of themselves on social media. She tries to do this thing where it's like, yeah, I got Brahmin genes. I don't need a reservation to get into a university. But all this nonsense, right? And she keeps trying to flex, like, and like it looks like Bugs Bunny, like with the rubber arm every time she tries to flex. You know what I'm saying? And she'll do it at a temple, which I think is weird. Like a bunch of this stuff, and people turned her into a meme because of it. But anyways, like this idea of Brahmins as like a upper caste idea, right? I started to fixate on that question, especially like the term is used so unilaterally, like even in the United States, like Boston Brahmin as like a very upper class elite, Bostonian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Decided like, hey, how about I just do like some very light reading on like how did caste come in? So at first, the idea I bought into is like, well, it all goes back to Manusmriti, the law of Manu, right? And it is this ancient text that talks about the practices of maintaining order in a society, of how the various classes should interact, how order is to be maintained by the upper classes, and so on and so forth, right? And what constitutes righteousness and all this and all that, right? As there's a recurring theme in a lot of ancient Hindu texts. I look into Manusmriti a little further, and the author of this text is apocryphal. It is a mythical figure who wrote this, right? So I'm like, okay, hold up. So I keep looking into it, and then the other thing is like the archaeological record does not indicate that Manusmriti itself was intended to be applied as a legal code, nor was it used as the basis of like codified law in ancient Indian societies. That's not to say that casteism has never happened before. It
right.
has. The basis for casteism comes from other, factors of discrimination, of other forms of class oppression. I'd say the way Marx has described, class oppression through the ages, I think applies more universally there than it does. And I think it, applies uniquely in this society through its own social paradigms and dynamics. That's been my read of it. I could probably stand to read more about how caste worked in ancient Indian societies and pre-colonization periods, right? Then when it comes down to even like the Muslim period, right? Like the real codified law is still only like Sharia for Muslims, and then among Hindus, there's no unified code of law. So as I've been reading it, it comes down to the British colonial period, and the study of Indology itself comes out of this need of the British Empire to grease the wheel of its colonial machine, right? Because if you think about like what is law, what does the legal profession do, particularly in a bourgeois or a capitalist society in particular, right? Law exists to smooth over contradiction. It exists to settle disputes between elites. It exists to set order when there are questions about what to do. For the British Raj in particular, they know they call the shots. They want their judges to call the shots. But they need to make rulings that are grounded with the Indian social strata. And they need to make decisions that are beneficial to the British and can sow discord among the locals so that they're easier to control and pit against each other. You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So
That's sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, like, so, like, that's the origin of Indology to some extent, right? And like, we have to understand that even if a local record comes out of the what is it? If it comes out of the British academic tradition, or if it comes out of the British Academy, it served a colonial role, and that cannot be separated from it, right? So what that then leads to is like to apply a kind of legal code to deal with Hindus, the British kind of adapt Manusmriti whole cloth into a kind of unified caste system that has been applied to India since the colonial period, to
Mhm.
the point that Indians to this day view it as their own social order, which is why I find that like among Hindu nationalists and the Hindutva movement more broadly, their evocation of Sanatana Dharma, or like timeless religion, of this idea of this as a social order that has always existed, is their attempt to rewrite history and to apply the British social order in a way that is beneficial to upper caste Hindus. Moreover, that criticism of Manusmriti that I mentioned, that comes from Ambedkar himself. And even among Ambedkar and Gandhi and other people of that period, there were disputes about how to view this text in relation to the question of how to handle caste and how to handle the inequality of caste, right? Gandhi and Ambedkar
Mhm.
read a lot on this subject. So Ambedkar himself specifically blames this document for the origins of the plight of the Dalits, right? Whether or not you agree with his assessment is another story, but I find it incredibly telling of Wilkerson that she missed all this, especially because this knowledge was obtained from a 5-minute Wikipedia binge. Am I
Yeah,
a scholar? No. Does reading Wikipedia make you smart? No. But it's like this is the kind of stuff that like me and you have experienced in our lives. You know what I'm
mhm.
saying? For Wilkerson to come in here and say it's not racism, it's casteism, and then to apply both understandings of race and caste sloppily, um, it's upsetting. It's very
Yeah. It's also offensive and rude and stupid and irresponsible. Um, but yeah, I the thing is I was always under the impression that the reason why caste is like it is in India is because of British rule. That yes, there was a caste system, but who do you think came in and was like, this is perfect. I'm going to use this and I am going to make it 100,000% worse. And the reason why I knew that
Mhm.
that had to be the reason is because they forced Christianity on uh, Black people in America, Black people in general, uh, people of African descent or people who live in Africa still. And then after they forced that, Christianity told us that it was don't worry, we're gonna see and we're gonna have better in the time after this, and don't worry, you can enslave people now, uh you'll still be good. Me and my enslaver are going to the same heaven apparently, because it's okay for them to enslave me, and it's okay, but it's not okay for me to do revolt, god forbid.
Yeah, I think it's just indicative of like shoddy scholarship from Wilkerson, because the existing scholarly record itself, and not that I've explored it well myself, does not posit any unified theories or understandings of caste as like a universally applicable idea across cultures,
Mm-hmm.
nor is it purely useful to apply to the United States, right?
Right.
The other thing being is like you can't really apply caste in this Indian understanding to the United States because, like, at least in my estimation, this ruling class of the United States itself is made up of diverse economic interests, right? Who themselves
Mm-hmm.
don't get along. And you see that play out in the culture war in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that yeah, you could of course have something like that happen in a society like India where like maybe upper caste Brahmins disagree about LGBT rights. Like maybe you can see that, but that is in no way applicable verbatim across the world. It's not really a universally applicable lens of study for India. It's definitely not useful to understanding dysfunction in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's shoddy scholarship, but moreover, just speaking from the perspective of journalism, what has been elucidated here? What news has been presented here? What has been presented to the reader or the audience here that they needed to know or that they did not know before that can drive them to do something, right? It doesn't make sense to me.
Especially for like the people that they want to be the readers. It's like, of course, all of those people think racism is bad. Nazi Germany is bad. Casteism, how we see it in India, especially from the outside, not knowing really almost nothing about it, is bad. So, what are you saying that is different from what they already know, but giving them antidotes to feel? I mean, it's trauma porn. It literally is. It's well written in some places, confusingly put together trauma porn, and it does. And what a biggest thing that me and you have been saying is you can really, first of all, majority of actual leftist scholars have already talked about this, and you're not saying anything more than honestly a centrist would. But on top of that, it's just you're saying it, and why are you saying it? You're saying it, and you're not saying this is how we fix it. You're saying it, and you talk about Nazi Germany, but you don't talk about how the fact that, I mean, and she talks about how she has this friend or people she know in Germany, and how they're like, oh, we are so much better than you because we don't have statues of Hitler around here, just like chilling, like you guys have statues of Robert E. Lee and shit like that. And that could never fly and shit like that. And like them talking about it and them like getting at it and kind of nipping. But like, you don't talk about how the fact that Nazism is actually back. Not, oh, it looks like it's coming back. It's been back
I mean that's really what I'm getting
in
at. Like
Germany and here. Shit, in
the,
India too.
I think like the thing I wanted to keep getting at is just like this is what zero dialectical materialism will do to a motherfucker. Like that's
Like,
basically this should be the title of the book. But I mean,
it's like, oh my God, nigga, you don't even gotta read Marx. You don't even gotta read the Wikipedia page. You don't even gotta read a Twitter thread. But I swear to God, if you ask, please don't use AI. AI is horrible for our environment. It is stupid. You are keep teaching it stuff every time you use it. Stop fucking using it.
stop making
But
sand
even
things.
if you used AI and asked that question of who is Marx? What was he about? What did he say? It would give you a basic understanding that would make you feel like, wow, this book said nothing. Because it didn't.
I mean, I'm just gonna say that even more simply, right? Is that Wilkerson doesn't even explain what this system is in service of, right? So it's like,
Mm-mm.
okay, so like
No,
it's cast as
capitalism is bad. God forbid you say you even talk about capitalism. No, she doesn't. She doesn't talk about how slavery was a well-oiled machine and how people were really mad at the additional capital that the South got with the enslavement of people because they told themselves we are not enslaving people anymore, but we still want capital, and that's bad, so you can't have slavery anymore.
Well,
and how cultures like Britain stopped slavery, but like also didn't stop slavery and did like indentured servitude and like force people from India and China, all over the Caribbean and Africa to work on do all of their fucking shit, but it's not slavery, so it's not bad.
Well, I mean, but that's exactly what I'm getting at, right? Which is like, okay, if it's not racism, it's casteism, but then what is this in service of, right? And it's like, again, like the role of racism in economic dispossession, in labor, in subordination, in the application of law, all this stuff, right? Like, it's absent. It's spuriously absent from this work. And like you've already said, you know, it's, I don't know. I think Shakespeare said it best: "Full of sound and fury, signifying nothing."
Yeah, it's crazy how you can like read random Malcolm X speeches of like him just talking to random niggas. Like literally it'll be like, where was Malcolm X? I don't know, at your cousin's house. And he just explains this shit perfectly. And it's like, why would I hypothetically spend the $22.99 for this New York Times bestseller for you to tell me shit that Malcolm X was saying before you were even born? And the people were saying before he was even born, and so on and so forth. And you're not saying anything new. And it's 20 when you drop this book, and you just went through all of this trauma, and you don't even add that in the book, bitch. But you add it in this movie. It is maddening. And honestly, this is a completely off the topic. I've been struggling to like read books for a while because of my education and how, again, a lot of writing intensive majors, a lot of books. I stopped doing a lot of traditional reading, even listening to audiobooks, because it was hard for me to get back into it. I listened to the Caste book. I got so angry that I started automatically listening to more audiobooks and like knowledgeable podcasts instead of just like the sometimes like true crime stuff, because like I'm like, there are people explaining more in situations where they aren't even trying to explain your thesis better than you in this book who wrote all of these words for this thesis. Like, do you not understand that that is bad writing? That is, and then also it feels like her book, like you needed to read her book Warmth of the Other Suns before you read this to really understand all of the things. And it's like, this is not a Marvel movie. I am not doing all of that shit. You should be able to tell me in this book what you want me to know, unless you can tell me that these books are connected 100% before I read them. I need to know that they're part of a trilogy or whatever. But if after I read your book, your newest book, I was like, damn, I feel like I should have read the other book because I feel like it would have made more sense. You're not writing well. That's bad writing.
According to the review section of Goodreads, that one didn't make much sense either.
Like, I just... and I was looking at the Wikipedia for that, and I was just like, you say that this is like a big account of like it's kind of confusing because she has three main people who she follows through like the Great Migration, but then it's she like interviewed like thousands of people. So I'm like, are you peppering everybody's stories in? And isn't that confusing? And wouldn't I kind of want a movie about that before I want a movie about you writing your second book? Like that don't even make sense, Ava. Like why? Y'all just all like I swear to God, everything's for fucking white people. And no offense if you're white, but like why like none of this was made for a black person who was dealing with her, the caste system in America, you, a person who descend, or even your parents, or even your family members who have to deal with caste in India, or people who dealt with the Holocaust, the survivors, the families of those survivors. It's this book isn't for us. This book isn't for us.
It's the
talking
humor white liberals. That's really what it is.
It really is. It's not, it's talking about us and our plights and the fucking real shit that we're going through, but it's not about, and it's not for us to like understand what we went through and where we should go next. This is just to make white liberals feel guilty, but also not to get them to think about the things that they should actually think about, like dismantling capitalism, or even like not being fucking racist to people who aren't Americans also. Like there's this big emphasis is like stop being racist to black people, or like black people who descended from slavery in America. But Haitians, go ahead. Like, what the fuck? And then there's some black people who are like, because there's all this fucking xenophobia, and there was fucking accounts of fucking like I've heard Jamaican, so I'm not saying it all, but like there was accounts of these Jamaican people who are being xenophobic to Haitians, even though they were like newer to the country. Like, girl, do you not know you have 30 minutes? Like, you are next. You're next. We are all next. It doesn't even matter that we're next, but like for your stupid brain where you want to other people, because this is all about otherism, because guess what? A black person, they're still being racist to another black person, but it's because you have papers, or you were born American, or what, you were a descendant of the Great Migration, or whatever. Like, you are able to other someone else. This society that we all live in worldwide is born and loves othering people. That is this biggest thing. That's what you can explain all of this. Is there's always got to be a other that is worse than you, that should have it worse than you, that did something to get you in your worst position, and that you should always rise above and be better and have power over and all that shit. And that fucking shit is wrong. And if you don't go to the root of why you feel the need to other someone, and not for general things of like, hey, I think I'm better than you because I believe people should have rights. Not like that. Like, it's just none of this is talking about how you can check your privilege, or how you can change, or try to encourage change. It's just yapping. And as a person who yaps professionally and in her free time, I ain't about it, girl.
I appreciate that at least this thing has become a thing we can joke about. Because, like, we came out of, like, fucking Transformers 1, like, damn.
Oh my God.
We came out of that movie just like, That's how Wilkerson think Caste works. Is the plot of that movie.
Bro,
Like
you
it's funny.
really do.
It's funny to us, but like at the same time, like I'm glad you got a chance to express your frustration about this, because this is the kind of obfuscation we're dealing with. And I think like me and you had like a very deep conversation about like just being trapped in like liberal spaces sometimes as like
Mm-hmm.
a further left leaning or like a more critical person. And like again, it's our views don't exist in this focus of critique of liberals, because we're secret rightists or that we sympathize with the right. It's because like the liberal paradigm is deficient in
Mm-hmm.
contradiction. It in fact either unintentionally enables contradictions or it exists to support it, right? So
Right.
like I think just understanding, like, because I think like the deep confusion you had like about like, but this doesn't make sense, is like because you're trying to like reason with somebody who is deluding themselves. You are, like you're dealing with someone who's like trying to like convince themselves of America's greatness and this being some aberration, how this like, intentionally trying to obfuscate something that you know to be true because you've experienced it or you've done the legwork of research or whatever it is, right? You know it to be true, and then someone's obfuscating it. Like, congrats, you understand what greenhouse gaslighting means. You now, you know what I'm saying? Like, and so I guess I was trying to think about how we wrap all this into a bow, and I kind of want to re-ask a question that I came up at the start of the year when we did our episode about American fiction, because I really do want to revisit this question, right? I think before you talked about how in this pressure for Black Americans to present greatness in everything they do, especially when trying to set themselves apart from white people, right? We should be comfortable with the degree of Black mediocrity. After having read this book and really getting into like the just the confusion and the obfuscation of Wilkerson's proposals here, do you still share the same view on celebrating Black mediocrity? Am I saying Wilkerson's mediocre? I didn't say that. I'm just asking the question.
I will say that being someone who has always been lower income, and I guess I'm a part of the middle class, but what is that even now? But we're not getting into that. Um, Me and Isabel Wilkerson have differences because she is in the upper middle class and I am in a lower class than her. So where people in my class that are Black have to work 5 times as hard to get to the level of Isabel Wilkerson, who would have to work maybe twice as hard than her white counterparts. So I don't believe in upper class Black people mediocrity. If you got the money, like, and this is a joke, but like not. Like, if Blue Ivy ends up being a bum, I'm gonna be very disappointed because, like, you have all of the opportunities and the chances and the abilities and like like and Black people have dealt with so much fucking shit historically, and like you hear about all these things that like Black people have created that, and they are being erased from like the creations of it, things that we use every day, like things that we desperately need, like the person who like helped create the GPS systems, like the science for it, she was a Black woman. Traffic lights, potato chip, like I can go on and on. But like those were not mediocre Black people who did that. And I and some of them were of various disadvantages, whether that be because of income, because of class and racism, um, or because of just class or just racism instead of class, whatever be you. I don't believe in middle to upper middle class and higher Black people being mediocre. Black people have been through so much. You better fucking succeed. And that's another reason why I'm pissing me off looking at her Instagram, seeing that she's like just doing these conferences and she's just getting her speaking engagement gig. She wrote her book, she got her little book money, she got put on the New York Times bestseller, she's got all these whatever, and then now she's going to all these conferences where everybody can stroke on her dick and tell her how right her book was, and she's not facing any real criticism. She's not like learning any new things from what we can see from the outside in. She hasn't received any new education like since 83. She's received all these honorary doctorate degrees because you receive those when you like speak at graduations, but those mean nothing. And it's like, why wouldn't you? And maybe this is just me coming from someone who is an education has always been in the forefront of my like whole life and everything. But why wouldn't you, in your infinite amount of like money and time and resources, why aren't you like studying professionally, getting your PhD, creating centers where you can advance more of these theories, where you can talk more about your theory, where you can get people who understand your theory to write, and this can be an official theory or whatever. Like, it's just like, why are you doing, if this was supposed to be you actually doing good, you learning something and you wanting to share that knowledge so we can better the human race, why aren't you doing anything to better the human race? Why are you doing something to better your pockets? Is it because you are a capitalist? Why didn't you talk about capitalism? Is it because you are a capitalist? Because you and your whole family have lived off of the system of being middle to upper middle class and you don't want to shake that, rock that boat, just like all of the other people in the upper class situations didn't want to shake that, rock that boat in all of the situations where you're talking about. And then you just do a blip of class in your book that is literally like 3 sentences when I literally am watching you in real time benefit from your class. And that's why you're allowed to go with your 1 degree and walk around and tell everybody that this is casteism, not class, not race, not all of this other shit. Because you are an upper class Black woman from a upper middle class background, and you are able to do that. You are able to be that mediocre. But if I even try to write something that don't let me write anything that is leftist. I mean, let's see how many people would read that. Let's see how many Colbert reports I would get on. How many white liberals would want to read the shit that I would have to say about class and racism and shit. And I do believe that I should still write it because my goal isn't to write shit for liberals or for white people in general. But that's what I'm saying. I don't believe other Black people should be writing for the benefit of white people and capitalism, especially not both.
Well, there you have it, folks. The sequel to our movie magic episode on American fiction.
I mean, the thing about American fiction is like he understood that he was a grifter. And if Elizabeth Wilkerson was just like, yeah, girl, I'm trying to get these white people, I'll be like, give me some money. Start the start the Brett Nicholson work, scholarship grant, PhD program. Why aren't you using any of your money to do any good? You are literally just lining your fucking pockets. And that is the reason why you wrote this. Because of grief and capitalism. Bitch, go to therapy with all that goddamn money you got.
At least when Beyonce grieved, we get a good album out of it.
Exactly. Jay-Z Chi, we get one of the best albums ever. And visual albums.
Okay.
Beyonce feels bad about her capitalism. She do The Lion King and give us like Afro beats, like shit. She feel bad about like being capitalizing off of gays. She gives us Renaissance. Like, what are you giving the people, girl? My girl Beyonce is giving us something. She's giving us bops. You think Caste is a bop? Mm-mm. It's not even one of those songs that I would just like jig to. I'm changing the channel.
I may have to edit a considerable portion of that, not because you said
I don't think you should.
But okay, first of all, I didn't want to say nothing, but it's like your mic was peaking. I'm gonna have to play around in Audacity for a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was getting heated because like
you want me to leave the swears in?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll leave them in. I'm not editing anything other than the audio. I mean, listen, Ms. Wilkerson, if you hear this somehow, don't take the anger to heart, but please take the criticism to heart. You know, like
right.
I'm saying that like you were almost on the edge of understanding that there is a complicating factor to race in the United States, and it is class. It is the exploitation of races and classes. It is the interplay and the racist dynamics in which those are, taken advantage of by the ruling class in this country, right? And it's what creates so much misery, so much chaos, so much suffering, not just in the United States, but around the world, as we're seeing, right? And we're
literally around the world.
And we're seeing an election where, like, especially, like, okay, like, I have no faith in the Republicans. I have no faith in Trump. Trump is a piece of shit. I'm comfortable saying that. I can also say that they have no plan to address any of the problems in the United States. But you would expect that the Liberal Party, the party that especially nominally takes a stand on these issues, would be able to reconcile some of these contradictions, and they have not been able to. They're dancing on these, right? They're dancing around it. And offering theory to obfuscate at a time when clarity is sorely needed, at a time when sanity is needed, at a time when sober reflection and an ability to embrace complexity is necessary. This doesn't help. This doesn't help. And I all I can say is just, from my own experiences, right? As someone who grew up in a Hindu house, as someone who's Indian American, as someone who's studied at a predominantly white institution, as someone whose partner is black, right? Like, this is my lived experience. This is what I know like the back of my hand. I know the experience of my life contradicts everything you wrote in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I've come to learn contradicts the everything that's been written in this book. So my criticism is based in a sincere truth. That's all I can say. So with that being said, we've been at this for what? How long have we been at this? We started at 7:05. It is 8:51. So we've been at this for almost 2 hours.
Oh my god!
I think we've really run the gamut on this. I think I've gotten out everything I wanted to say about this. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything you think should be expounded on before we close?
I don't think so. I don't know what else could be said.
I would just say that, this is what I keep saying. Like the term greenhouse gaslighting, like I said it as a joke, but what it really what it ends up talking about is like the effects of ideologized thinking on the recipient of those thoughts, right? And how it
Hmm.
obscures us from approaching reality, especially in a politicized environment, right? And I think when when you talk about gaslighting in the subject of trauma informed therapy, right? The denial of your own reality, the denial of your own experiences as a tool to manipulate, right? And the greenhouse effect. I think people have often used the metaphor of like a frog sitting in a pot of water as it boils and not realizing that the temperature is being turned up. Um, those twin ideas, those twin concepts kind of play into the name of this show, and it paints the topics we've been trying to talk about. And I feel like, unfortunately, we just haven't been able to get into as much of these discussions as I would have liked to this year. So I'm glad that, in spite of our comprehensive election coverage this year, at least we've been able to touch up on some of this. But I would just continue to say that, like, just be careful in examining some of these obfuscatory works and figures in the landscape, right? Is the discourse politics itself? No, but I think we're in a stage now where discourse has become politics to some extent in the eyes of people. It shapes people's minds, and people need a form of immunization. I can't think of a better way to look at it, right? Of like just like you need to be able to look at things and be like, hey, this doesn't add up, this doesn't make sense, I don't know why this is being propped up, I don't know why this is being presented as gospel when it doesn't make sense, or it flies in the face of what I'm dealing with, or it doesn't explain the things it claims to explain. And I think we, especially with both how the Democratic Party has operated, as well as just the Trumpification of the Republican Party, all
And
mainstream
the Democratic Party.
that I mean, you can even talk about third parties at this point too, right? Like all US electoral politics participates in this, right?
Hmm.
People talk about like there was a post-truth era after Trump. I think we're in a pre-truth era, right? Um and I don't know if that offers anyone any solace or any clarity. I don't think it definitely doesn't for me. But sometimes you just got to talk about this shit and just be like, hey, I know this is being propped up as like cool shit, but I don't agree with it. I don't think this explains anything for me.
Hmm.
So
I
that's
think
all.
uh, it's always good to ask, okay, and it's always, you can always ask that at any given time. I want you to get more comfortable asking, okay, and because it's a complete sentence, and a lot of people don't have answers to that, and that's how you know it's bullshit.
So I think that does it for episode 110. I still got to figure out a title for this thing. Maybe I'll pull something out, but till then, folks, hang tight, enjoy your fall, take care.
Bye.